Bobby Sandage is the CEO and president of a new company, Coronado Biosciences, newly traded. They started trading in the fall, and it has got to be one of the most interesting biotech plays I've seen in a long time. It's a story that I know well because I'm getting ready to start covering it, but Bobby is here with us, and Bobby, what a great opportunity to talk to you about something called the hygiene hypothesis. This was a study that was done in the 1980s by a group of 3 doctors that were gastroenterologists out of the University of Iowa. And they had a theory, a hypothesis, that they observed something very interesting happening in North America, and particularly in Canada as well, these highly developed countries, that they didn't see happening in other countries. And tell us a little bit about that, because this is where your story starts.
Thank you, Dusty. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you about this. So the hygiene hypothesis was developed by 3 gastroenterologists at the University of Iowa in the early 1980s. Dr. Joel Weinstock, who was the chief of gastroenterology there, Dr. David Elliott, and Dr. Robert Summers. What they had observed in their practice was an increase in incidence of people showing up for treatment with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. That's what they focused on, inflammatory bowel disease. And like many people in this particular area, they were focusing on what was causing this increase. And they put their heads together and came up with the idea that maybe instead of like everybody else was focused on something in the environment, maybe a genetic component, that maybe it was something that was taken out of the system. Turns out that Dr. Weinstock is not only a gastroenterologist, but an immunologist and now a parasitologist as part of his credentials. And so they developed this hypothesis because of the distribution of this increase in autoimmune disease that's been seen in the industrialized world, that maybe it was the lack of, we're never exposed to helminths, intestinal helminths or intestinal parasites anymore. And their hygiene hypothesis was developed as a phenomena where you see an increase in autoimmune disease in the industrialized world. Other parts of the world, the incidence is low and steady and not increasing. And if you then look in those same areas where the incidence is low and steady and not increasing, there's estimated about 1 billion people are chronically infected with intestinal helminths, intestinal worms, parasites. And so their hypothesis, simply stated, is if you never got exposed to an intestinal helminth, then you may not be able to properly regulate your immune system, especially if you have a predisposition to one of these autoimmune diseases.
Fascinating. So to break it down for people, what we're saying is here we have these highly developed nations. Unlike the rest of the world, we're not getting exposed to, for example, ill-prepared pork or something like that that might have a parasite in it. We're not consuming that, and therefore this may be part of the reason why we have higher rates of autoimmune diseases.
Well, that's what the hygiene hypothesis, and it's so well accepted in the medical community that there are literally dozens of investigators that are exploring helminths as a potential treatment for various autoimmune diseases in animal models and in human trials. We happen, because of the work at the University of Iowa, have one of the only product that we think can be safely used and managed in a human population.
So this helminth, this is a very fancy scientific word for something that you're trying to capture. Is it a parasite? Is it what is it?
So it's an intestinal worm. It's an intestinal parasitic worm, and the one that we use that was invented at the University of Iowa by these 3 doctors is called, we call it TSO. It's short for Trichuria suis ova, and it's the pig whipworm eggs, if you will. TSO, Trichuria suis, was selected by the inventors at the University of Iowa because it had a number of features that were beneficial to human exposure. One, when you take it, it causes the immunological, immunomodulating response that you want, but it doesn't cause any permanent infection. They simply die in a couple of weeks and are eliminated from the body. You have to take it every 2 weeks to continue to get the effect. It has some other features. It never leaves the GI tract, doesn't get in the bloodstream. There's no way to infect another person with it. And it turns out the ova, the eggs, are very stable, and I can put it through what it needs to do to become a pharmaceutical grade dosing unit.
And that pharmaceutical dosing unit, it's not like drinking a tequila worm or something, is it? I mean,
No, in fact, the TSO, the eggs themselves, if you will, are microscopic. You can't see them. When we put 2,500 eggs in 15 cc's or a tablespoon of normal saline, they're clear, odorless, and tasteless, and you simply drink that once every 2 weeks. You can't even see it. It looks like clear water.
and theoretically, and in these studies that you've conducted thus far, when people take this clear liquid, this clear odorless liquid that we know what's in there, you start to see an effect in their body's reaction, their Crohn's disease, this autoimmune diseases. Pardon me if I'm wrong, but this has implications beyond Crohn's and some of these other intestinal tract diseases, right?
Absolutely. We have 4 studies completed. The first one was done in 29 patients with Crohn's disease, where we were able to demonstrate that over 72% of the patients had clinical remission at the end of 24 weeks of treatment, and almost 80% had a clinical response. We also have a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial in ulcerative colitis patients, and where the placebo rate was about a 17% response, whereas the TSO group had a 43% response, more than doubling the response rate in the patients with ulcerative colitis. And then we have an initial trial in multiple sclerosis, where the investigator at the University of Wisconsin showed a 70% reduction in what's known as a gadolinium-enhanced MRI lesions, so a surrogate of the disease of the neurons found in multiple sclerosis patients. And when he stopped the treatment, it went right back up to having diseased neurons. And the 4th study is a study we just finished, in which it was called a single dose escalation. We went up to very high doses, more eggs, up to 7,500 eggs, and it was extremely well tolerated, with only mild GI side effects being seen in just a few people that were self-limiting and didn't even require any treatment.
So one of the interesting things that I found is, as I was researching your company, first of all, we have to talk about, there's some investors here in this particular deal that have taken large positions and have really been, they really believe this is a major, not a home run, this is like a big major hit. And I can see why now, because you've got multiple applications. Just some of the diseases that you've mentioned are huge markets. And so this one's a multiple shot on goal play, number one. And we're spending a lot of time talking about the hygiene hypothesis. We're not even yet talking about the other side of the coin here, which is the immunotherapy side. But this is intriguing to me because the rest of Wall Street is kind of taking this approach of, well, you know, we're talking about a biologic. We're talking about a very interesting biologic. Would the FDA really ever approve this? But your money guys, the investors that are in this, are saying, watch and see. This is a very interestingly produced, manufactured, GMP quality process. Tell us about that a little bit.
So, well, we actually use Mother Nature to do it. We control a master ova bank. We actually raise pigs from birth. We infect the pigs. The ova will turn into worms and reproduce and shed eggs, and we collect those eggs. Any one batch can produce anywhere from 50 to 100 million eggs. We then send them to the manufacturing facility that sterilizes them, tests them for contaminants, and then put them in individual dosing units.
What are some of the challenges for your management team? And by the way, let's talk about that. You have a really powerful management team behind this.
Very experienced management team and board of directors. I have over 32 years in the business and drug development. The executive chairman, Glenn Cooper, over 25 years. He and I helped manage Endeavus Pharmaceuticals for almost 20 years before we sold it to Endo in 2009. Noah Bierman is the COO, 25 years in the business, former president and CEO of another biotech company, a very well-respected Wall Street analyst, just joined as the CFO. This is Dr. Lucy Liu. Dr. Eric Rowinski, the world-renowned oncologist, is the vice chairman of the company. The founder and director of the company, Dr. Lindsay Rosenwald, is probably one of the most successful biotech entrepreneurs ever.
That's right. He sold Cougar Biotech for quite a bit of money just about a year ago.
A couple of years ago, yes.
And then he saw this and said, hey, wow, look at this. This is interesting. I want back in the game, and let's do this one. This is really good.
That is correct.
Fascinating also to me is the fact that you guys are, in essence, really just starting to trade. You've already gained a NASDAQ listing. The stock is starting to pick up momentum, et cetera. You've got multiple studies going on. Tell me about what keeps you up at night.
Well, it's a matter of just executing the plan and making sure that we do what we need to do. We have, as you said, a newly minted public company. We did it through a self-registration, sort of an unconventional way, but we had a cash runway. We had a shareholder base that was important, and in fact, we got listed from the OTC Bulletin Board and NASDAQ in 32 days. And they say it's the shortest time a biotech company has stayed on the OTC Bulletin Board before being approved for listing on NASDAQ. So it's a matter of doing the things that we say we're going to do and making sure that we perform to those milestones.
As you're presenting at conferences, you are putting on a slideshow and you're walking through the steps with investors and new people and new people, institutions that may be interested in coming to the stock, et cetera. And there's got to be a slide, there's got to be a part of the presentation where you say, I'm really hoping they're paying attention to this one. What is that slide? Can you describe it to us?
Sure. It's actually the first slide in my deck and the last slide. It's the value proposition. So it points to the fact that we have two biologics, which are inherently more valuable than a small molecule, that we have broad applications for both of these biologics. The autoimmune, as I already mentioned, we already have evidence that it has efficacy in inflammatory bowel disease and multiple sclerosis, and we're starting pilot studies in rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, psoriasis, celiac disease, and type 1 diabetes. We think we have opportunities in a lot of these autoimmune diseases. The other product, we have evidence of efficacy in acute myelogenous leukemia in the clinic in patients with that cancer. And in the laboratory, we already have evidence of efficacy in multiple myeloma, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, and breast cancer. So with that as the background, I want to make sure people understand that we have a unique opportunity with both of these compounds that you rarely see with any drugs, much less, you just don't ever see this sort of opportunity. And that's what brought me to this company. Lindsay, Dr. Rosenwald recruited me 20 years ago for his very first startup, and he asked me to come back to help him run this company 22 years later.